working as a magician for my entire adult life. My partner Teller is fond of saying that magic is the unwilling suspension of disbelief. Video games are kind of something else. They're a complete immersion of pretending. And this is a kind of suspension of disbelief that I'm really interested in.
The science of gaming goes well beyond its technology. In fact, it is one of the most studied and best established topics in the field. Games give our brains something to do. I'm looking forward to learn about the science and psychology of modern games and how they're affecting our culture.
It takes a large team of people to bring a modern video game to life. This process can take years to produce a great game. Today I'm at Capcom to finish my personal education in the process of game development.
Video games are a cultural experience. It all has to do with not so much the technology, but how the games are experienced and remembered by the people who are playing them.
Madison Square Garden sold out because of video games.
We've grown to over 67 million players every single month.
The big fear, I think, when people started gaming a lot was, oh, that's going to take these kids and isolate these people. No, they're actually social with people around the world.
Virtual reality, giving the consumers things they didn't even know they wanted at the time.
This is Randy Pitchford. He's my old friend and he's co-founder of Gearbox Software. When did you know you were going to be able to make your living? What was the breakthrough moment?
I was very fortunate. When I grew up, my dad was always a technologist, and so we always had home computers that he built in our house. So I was able to learn how to program at a very young age, but it was always a hobby. It was always just this sort of thing I did on the side. There's this other path that I'm gonna have to take to make a living. And I was studying law, and my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, said, what are you doing? You're like, everything that you care about and is passionate about is about entertainment, it's about creating feelings. You're spending all of your free time programming and messing around with the computer, and you're not even getting paid for it. That's clearly what you wished you were doing. Why not just make your life about that? And it never occurred to me before, but I looked around and I discovered that you can actually get a job making video games. I think when I made the decision, I wasn't sure that there was going to be success. I just knew that it would make me happy. I learned about a company here in Dallas called Apogee, which had just launched a game called Wolfenstein 3D. And I got out here, we made a game called Duke Nukem 3D, and it turned out to be pretty successful.
I'm looking good.
But I realized pretty quickly, like I think I can do better than these guys. It was that idea that hey, these guys will pay me, and by making a video game we can reach lots of people. That's what led me to do it. And then once I was there, it was not even a year before I left and started my own thing.
How many people do you work with on a daily basis?
Well, there's 300 folks at the studio, and I probably interact with between 20 and 30 every day.
And when you first started hiring people, we were hiring friends, I imagine, right?
Yeah, I mean, we started the studio with just a handful of folks that I worked with at a previous place.
You were the one they rally around.
Sometimes, when we start on an effort, yeah, almost invariably, I'll plant a flag in the ground. So this is what we're going on. But when you have creative people building something, everybody needs to believe in what we're creating together. The kinds of games that we like to make are big, blockbuster video games, and it takes a lot of talent, it takes a lot of people, and it takes teamwork.
What I get confused about when video games first started hitting, I was always thinking that what you wanted to see out of art was a glimpse into the creator's heart. and that giving people these choices would ruin that. And that was a deep misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Because what's really happening is not giving them choice, but it's giving them a chance to explore the heart of the creator in an interactive way.
And feel agency in it.
We try to draw this firm line of interaction. Whereas if you're watching Apocalypse Now, you invest in those characters the same way you do Mario. It reminds me of the phantom limb stuff, you know, where you can feel your hand even if it's been cut off.
Oh, interesting.
But once you bring the visual in,
Yeah.
everything changes.
Yeah.
And what you've done with video games is you've taken that phantom limb, show it to us. So the
wow,
connection.
that is profound.
What are you most excited about right now?
We're working on a new thing called Battleborn, which I'm super excited about, but also terrified by, because we're trying some new things we've never done before that no one's ever done before.
How long from the first moment you and your team have what you would call this idea, maybe without even the name, to that thing ships? How long does that take?
So in the case of Battleborn, about 4.5 years.
And is that industry standard, 4.5 years?
I don't know what industry standard is, but ironically, it's about the same amount of time it took us to develop the first Borderlands game.
So maybe that's not ironic, maybe that's the amount of time it takes. It wasn't always this way. In the early days, making a game was usually a one-man job, not a team effort. For example, the creator of Space Invaders not only coded and designed the game, but executed the artwork, built the arcade hardware, and assembled the microcomputer from scratch. As technology evolved and games became more complex, small teams began to emerge. But the limitations of hardware and software in the 1980s kept average Joes and small companies from developing games for major systems. By the mid-1990s, game companies began providing developer kits to aspiring game designers to encourage game development for their systems. As game budgets began to grow bigger, this allowed for larger teams where individuals could focus on their specialties, be it art, programming, level design, or animation. Today, AAA game developers such as Gearbox have entire departments focused on specific tasks, allowing for higher quality work and larger scale game experiences.
It's probably also a function of the scale that we're playing at. Like, you know, we're making big AAA blockbuster video games that are on the consoles that have to compete in the market with all the other games like that.
You guys are creating this whole art form that will be, is already, but certainly will continue to be the dominant art form of the 21st century.
I still remember the first time I developed the game, and I thought my first game was going to be great. It turned out it wasn't great at all. In fact, it wasn't even good.
I'm one of those people that when I look at a video game, even the 8-bit version of a video game, I'm like, I can't do it. So I'm impressed, and I'm never like, this sucks.
When did I know I was good at it? I don't know. I mean, I hate everything I've ever done. So, I'll let other people decide if I'm any good at it. I just want to do better next time out.
For people who want to develop games, expect your first game to not be that good, but don't get discouraged. Before you know it, you'd actually be very, very good at making games.
Gabe Zickerman is the leading voice on the gamification of society. What exactly is gamification? Gabe is about to educate me.
One of the core tenets of gamification is this idea that people want to be their best selves, but they don't do that because they're distracted, they're busy, and there's other stuff on their mind. Probably the most canonical example of that is like Nike Plus or Nike Fit, right? This is a game-like experience. It's a gamified experience, right? That helps you exercise more, live the lifestyle, become the person that you want to be.
Yeah.
Now, if we flip that script around, we can say if we want to engage people and get them to actually do something that moves them forward or get them to buy products and services or be loyal to an idea or be good at their jobs, why don't we fill that space with game-like experiences?
And that's what basically gamification is sort of. It's this landscape that we are now in, that everyone is sort of keen to the fact that humans love games and we can get messages, we can get instruction across better, we can obviously commerce if there's a game vibe to it.
Right, and just consider this. So one of the things that I often explain to people looking at games from the outside, so companies that don't make games, but people who are making other experiences, like teaching even. So the thing that I try to explain to them is, games are designed to get and keep people's attention for as long as possible. Like from a game designer standpoint, the idea is once you sit down in front of that game, I want to keep you there literally until you have to go to the bathroom, and ideally even beyond that point, like until your physical needs override the enthusiasm of this game. We have more or less conquered boredom today. You have that little phone in your pocket, you've got that smartphone in your pocket, and what that means is you don't have to be bored even for 1 second of any moment of any day.
During boredom, are there elevated levels of something in our brain? Like, what is it that we fear about boredom?
So one of the things we've recently learned in science is that actually boredom is not what we think at all. So our brain is about 95% as active during boredom as it is during normal behavior. So it's not the
I'm going to put that disclaimer in front of every TV show and movie I make.
It's well, and you know, like, no, your movies are never boring. Your TV shows are never boring.
Thank you very much.
But some people make boring TV shows. So we're doing something that's kind of boring, so our brain shifts to doing something else.
Right. In short, games give our brains something to do. It's been proven that in an idle or resting state of boredom, the brain is 95% as active than when engaged in a task. Not surprisingly, the brain is more engaged, thus more relaxed during active gameplay sessions. It has something to do, something to focus on. The majority of consistent gamers agree that they can more easily lose track of time while playing a game than any other task.
So in a world where that is omnipresent, where that kind of instinct and impulse is all around you, that kind of input is everywhere, how hard does everyone else have to work to make their experiences as engaging as that and to get and keep people's attention?
Are games healthy in general? Are they good for the human mind and spirit?
I think the human mind is inextricably connected to games. And I think even asking the question of whether or not games belong with us and whether we belong with games ignores the essential fact that we are game-making machines. And before we had the technology, before we had the software, we used to make them on our own, and now we consume other people's games. So games and humans are connected since the beginning of time and probably will be for the rest of time.
I think when you look at a lot of the efforts like the gamification of different things in life, I think there's this natural need for people to have this level of interaction.
Everything we do I want to order Chinese food or do I want Mediterranean? Let me see, let's play a game here.
That ability to combine my real life wishes and desires with gaming, I think is fascinating.
I was asked a question at one point in time. People spend hours and hours building a house in The Sims, and doesn't that seem like a waste of time? And I said, would you say that to somebody who had an easel in front of them and had been painting a picture?
This is Michael Evans. He's a producer for Capcom, a video game industry leader with mega franchise hits like Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and 8-bit classics like Mega Man and Gunsmoke. I sat down with him to get a sense of the entire development process for a modern-day video game. They start out around a board meeting, and you're talking about concepts and ideas, right?
Totally. Coming up with that initial concept, the pitch, securing the budget, and then bringing your team together. You know, how is this story going to unfold? What kind of locations are we looking at? What kind of characters? The design team is working very closely with the programmers and the engine team to create the tools to come up with fun gameplay mechanics and elements. And those are sometimes tested in very rudimentary ways in the beginning because you want to try a bunch of ideas and you want to see what works and you want to throw away what doesn't work.
Once the characters' movements are captured and animated, they are then placed into the game's world. This is where the different sensibilities come in: programming, coding, and inventing the rules of the game. Once the basic characters, rules, and levels are created, a prototype version of the game is ready to play.
From a developer's point of view, especially as a producer, you want to make sure that the core pillars of your game are tested early in the beginning if possible. In pre-production, a lot of times you'll have a milestone or delivery that's either called first playable, where we test the mechanics, or vertical slice. We want to see one slice of this game that's going to look final quality in terms of art.
Well, I remember very distinctly going in, doing mocap, and all of a sudden I do something, or I did something that, it wasn't in the script.
The script, yeah.
But they like it.
Yeah, of course.
And they want to keep it.
Yeah.
Ready and action.
Hey, Sal, help me with the garbage.
So, without your expertise...
Through the development process, which can be a couple years, technology changed vastly in a couple years, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could be midway through your project and a new technology becomes available that changes how you look at things, or someone comes up with a great idea that you can't just pass on. And that's what's exciting, about video games is you're kind of building the plane as you're flying it, as they say.
This is one of the most important milestones in game development. Does the idea work? Do the characters, the world, and the rules all come together to make a fun gameplay experience? If not, many times it's back to square one for the development team. If the game is roughly there and it's fun to play, then the entire team moves into the next stage, improving artwork, animations, textures, and coding away the flaws. This process can take years to produce a great game. Some games don't have as long of a development cycle, but the same process applies. You've got to have a great idea and a competent team of developers to create a good game. Actually, the gaming industry has started really concentrating on hiring actors, and you bring their expertise in
and performances,
so that it becomes even more real for the audience.
It really does.
It
really does.
And that's where I come in.
As technology improves, for example, motion capture, like you were saying, you have these actors come in. A lot of games use motion capture these days to get really believable performances within a game so that, players are invested in every moment.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
This is David Eddings, an executive at Gearbox Software and the voice of the beloved character, Claptrap.
Gearbox? Those deletes? Let me tell you something. Gearbox is the best video game company in the world, bar none. They treat their employees with dignity, respect, and, yes, love. Also, I am a total tool. With the rusty salad fork, know what I mean?
Were you recruited to do Claptrap, or did you?
It's like everything in this industry, I've never actually applied for any of it. Right, kind of got pulled in.
Was it Randy that brought you in for that?
Well, Randy asked me if I would create the character, and so
it was already drawn.
It was an afterthought, and the character had been drawn years prior. Lauren Wood, who designed the character, designed Claptrap, the first iteration of Claptrap, in college.
And did you do much to come up with the voice of Claptrap?
Coming up with Claptrap, we knew he was supposed to be irritating because he's going to remind you of all these missions that you have to do, but he has to be a little bit endearing too.
Can't help but notice you're not getting me out of here. Maybe you're thinking, oh, Claptrap's such a strong and noble paragon of justice and skill. He can get himself out.
Which most of the time you would be totally right about. But as it stands right now, I can use some help.
It's kind of like that little yippy dog in the Warner Brothers cartoon with, hey Spike, let's go beat up a cat, Spike. Come on, let's go beat up a cat, And then there's Johnny Cab from Total Recall where, Arnold's like, how did I get in here? And Johnny Cab's like, the door opened and you got in. And so I just kind of put those two together.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am a CL4P TP steward bot, but my friends call me Claptrap. Or they would if any of them were still alive, or had existed in the first place. I wonder what it's like to have a belly button.
I took a little bit from Curly Howard as well, because...
Didn't we all?
Yeah, the line that a lot of other people know that is like, hey, check me out, I'm dancing.
Oh, come on, let's get down. Come on, everybody. Check me out, I'm dancing.
It's a little bit of Curly.
We're not ordinary people. We're morons.
What are your daily duties?
That's an interesting question. So, my daily duties are to create new opportunities. So I did the Tales from the Borderlands by Telltale was my idea. I did the deal. I even named the game. Comic book deals, toys. The movie deal was something that I was working on for a long time, getting it to the point.
So you're mostly selling intellectual property that was created for games and other media?
Yes, I would be licensing out our intellectual property. And there are times that I would license other intellectual properties as well.
And what is the difference between exploiting a property that's created in-house and one that you buy. Like Duke Nukem was bought.
Yes, from 3D Realms, as a matter of fact. And it's funny, I had worked on Duke Nukem as well, on the publishing side back in the late 90s and the early aughts. When you buy an IP from somebody, then generally you're wanting to do right by that IP, otherwise you wouldn't have bought it. When you're creating an IP, you're creating what you want. When you're buying an IP, you're buying something that's already been established.
Right.
And so there's the big difference. When you're licensing an IP that you don't own, then you have to play by the rules of that particular intellectual property.
Do you do a lot of licensing?
I do. But these days, when we create our own intellectual property, I don't do as much licensing coming in as I do licensing going out.
Intellectual property, or IP, is a term in the entertainment world used to describe a brand or property created by an individual or company. Much like in film and television, there are two types of video games: original and brand-based. For example, Borderlands and Battleborn are both original properties created by Gearbox. On the other hand, Spider-Man, a Marvel IP, often has games created by Activision, a top video game publisher. They don't own Spider-Man, they purchase the rights from Marvel to make a game based upon that property. There are pros and cons to both original and licensed games, but both require significant commitment and investment by the game publisher and developer. But as a business guy and someone who has a lot of friends in the industry, are there rivalries? Do you find yourself going head to head with people that could have been friends or could have been enemies before?
I don't look at us as being in competition. Now we are, if we're releasing at the same time. But the reality is, for the longest time in this industry, it was really about building a category, and not trying to kill the other guy or the other company. Because if I like to say, if there was only Coca-Cola, there wouldn't be a lot of people drinking soda pop. And so what we want to do is I want people to have successful games, because the more that their game is successful, then there's more people to buy our game as well. So I've built my career on trying to help people and help them be successful. But we can all win, and me winning or Gearbox winning doesn't require other people to lose necessarily.
I'm here at the USC Game Innovation Lab to learn about the science and psychology of modern games and how they're affecting our culture. I have 3 kids who have been playing games since they were old enough to pick up a smartphone, so I'm real curious about how games and technology, being so woven into the current generation's culture, will affect their decisions and their future lives. Mariantina Gotsis is a research professor at the Interactive Media Division of the USC School of Cinematic Arts. She is going to take me through how USC is educating the next generation of game designers. Why don't you talk to me about some of the research you're doing, or what you're excited about research-wise?
What we do is we develop and we evaluate all sorts of interactive entertainment. So that means games, virtual reality, social media, and interactive entertainment very broadly. So some things are more interactive experiences, so immersive experiences, not necessarily games.
You said submersive?
Immersive
experience?
Yeah.
That's not a game. Give me an example
Yeah,
of one of those.
so an example of that would be an experience where you're doing something and it feels like you're there. And that's what a lot of virtual reality is. It kind of puts you somewhere or brings something to you. So it's that experience of being there is what we talk about a lot. Sometimes that may be a place, or it might be doing something fantastical. Like we're doing this exercise game for people with spinal cord injury, and exercise is really boring. Rehab therapy is really, really boring. And so making a very repetitive task that's very boring, very enjoyable is pretty important.
It's obvious that the human brain is more stimulated while it's consuming entertainment. Movies, music, a good book, they all create a stimulus response in the brain. With interactive entertainment, it's a bit different. The mind, the emotions, and even the physical body are all engaged to create a visceral and emotional response during gameplay. So what happens to the brain when we interact with media? Like, what have you observed?
What we do know is that you get a lot of engagement. So depending on what kind of medium it is, games are very visually stimulating. So that part of the brain is very engaged. There's a lot of things that happens with the auditory system. In VR, you also have full command. When you wear the glasses and you have head tracking, your ocular vestibular system in your ears, the thing that controls your balance, is completely taken over. Depending on what kind of rewards you give, you might stimulate, in good and bad ways, the reward centers of the brain. But to me, the most exciting thing is the social engagement. So things that you do with someone else, right? Whether it is playing a game together or being in a virtual world together and being engaged in social interaction and social activities stimulates the brain in different ways. And the default resting state of the brain is social. Like, we're waiting for input.
We're wired for that, basically.
We're wired for other people.
We can go to a completely immersive world, and then with a flip of a switch, you can go back to those Pac-Man days where you literally have, one pixel at a time being pushed together.
I think deep down there's a part of everybody that kind of wants to experience that total immersion, and I don't think humans are going to change.
I want a game that has a good immersive story that's going to take me into a new world and excite me, But then sometimes I want Modern Warfare. I just want to run around and shoot stuff, and that's cool too.
Gaming is a little different than TV and film too, because gaming, we don't do a lot of takes. You got a couple of boxes that represent an F-16, and there's a chair taped to the box. You sit in the chair, your joystick is another stick coming up through the box. I've been in a jet before. When I did Black Ops 2, and I was in that fighter jet, I kind of knew how the joystick was. It's so detailed and just tiny little movements. And so that's what they're looking for in gaming too. They're looking for realism, and they're looking for how it's really done. They want it to be as real as possible.
Casting actors now is much more important for games than it's ever been. As technology improved, now not only the body, but you also have the facial performance can be captured in a video game. The reason is because it's more authentic. When we talk, we have these little micro actions that we do, and everything is captured.
Instead of getting bigger and bigger, you're getting more and more specific, and
more
specific,
subtle, and harder to cast for characters for video games.
Speaking of motion capture, do you guys have a group of actors that you work with all the time, or do you go out and cast people?
We work very closely with partners like Bruges Entertainment, and we've done a ton of work with them.
Capcom hires us for our cinematic experience. You're hiring actors, you're acting, you're performing, you got to write a script, you got to tell a story. The only difference in a video game is you're telling the story, you're spreading it out over a longer period of time, and you're giving the player something to do in between their little story segments.
The developers are also fans. They played a game and they were like, oh my God, this game would be awesome if it was like this. And then they went and they made that.
The video game industry is bigger than the movie industry. That's a viable career and one that can take you beyond just video games.
I love this kind of stuff. That's why I got into this. And it's so rewarding on my end to see the joy that comes when something you're working on is passed on to new generations.
That was my dream. It was to work in video games or to be in a rock band. One of those.
This is Mikey Newman, voice actor for multiple games and the writer of Gearbox's flagship game, Borderlands. So, Mikey, you wrote Borderlands.
I did, yeah.
You did. How'd you get that gig? That's a good gig.
I've been working here a while. I actually started in the game industry when I was 19, so I've been at this for almost 15 years now. I wrote the Brothers in Arms games, and we were moving into Borderlands, and I was playing the game, and I lit a short person on fire, and I was like, oh, our game's funny. I should write a funny game, and I just jumped into it.
You ain't no Hyperion robot. You're a Vile Hunter, huh? That's like a unicorn. I am the best robot. Yeah, oh yeah.
And what's the format you use to write a video game? How is it, the actual typing, how's it done?
I use screenplay format.
So are you also part of the directing the actors when you do that?
Mm-hmm. I am also an actor in the games. I play a character called Scooter.
Oh, hey man, welcome to Scooter's Catch a Ride. What can we do for you today?
But I love working with the actors. We've had so many talented actors come through. Because I'm hands-on, I guess. I like to do everything. I got my hands in the art. Like on Borderlands 1, I was concepting like the freeze frame title cards and the intro and picking music and editing the trailers. Maybe I have trust issues. I want to do it all.
How'd you get into this racket?
Me and my best friend at the time, Brian Thomas, went to high school in Plano, Texas, where Gearbox used to be. And we started working on Counter-Strike levels and this other mod called Day of Defeat, which was a World War II mod and, modification for a game called Half-Life. Those both got bought by Valve, and we realized there was probably like a job there.
A modification or mod is the alteration of content within an existing video game to make it operate differently from its original version. Mods are typically created by the general public and require the original game for the player to run it. The most common kind of mods range from add-ons like new weapons, characters, or even entire new levels to total conversions, which can result in a completely different style of play from the original game. For example, Counter-Strike, one of the most popular online games ever made, was originally a Half-Life total conversion mod. Mods are also a useful way for aspiring designers to get their foot in the door with game developers.
Me and Brian used to drive by the Gearbox offices and we're like, someday we're gonna work there. And we both do. We actually both work here. Brian's one of the lead designers on Battleborn. Gearbox is a very special place to me because it kind of allowed me to just try things. I'd never edited a game trailer before. Randy said, go for it. And now I have like 12 video game marketing awards.
How many games do you have working at a time in your head?
Right now, just the one, thankfully. I've written 7 shipped video games.
When you're going to write a game, you're starting to write Borderlands. How is the actual mechanics of that done? You do 3x5 cards in the wall?
I love 3x5 cards. I love looking like a crazy person, you know.
Do you do 3, really?
Oh, I do.
Do you have a whole wall?
During Brothers in Arms Hell's Highway, I had an entire wall of note cards. That was a crazy game to work on because there was 86 minutes of cutscenes in addition to everything that was in the game story-wise and all the dynamic stuff spoken between people. So you already have a full-time job of just the story and how the characters are communicating anyway. And then I'm also running a team that is basically making a feature film.
Matt, you gotta admit, what happened in the hospital was you were dry firing at a wall.
It wasn't exactly. So you're like crazy or bonkers or something?
No, I'm fine. It was one thing, Red. Matt, I found you stumbling around a hospital. I was looking for Frankie!
Even looking back, I'm like, wow, that was an accomplishment. It wasn't the 200 note cards on my wall, which is definitely the accomplishment.
Psychologists are increasingly being hired by video game companies in order to make games more challenging, more compelling, and fun.
This is Dr. Johnny Soroker, philosophy professor at the University of Twente. I sat down with him to learn about what happens in the brain during gameplay. Start with the 2 pillars of happiness.
The really happiest people in the world tend to be the people who identify something they're really good at
And by that I mean identify in a strong philosophical sense.
So not like I'm really good at accounting, but I don't identify that
exactly
as what I want to be identified as.
So you wouldn't say that you do improv.
I'm an improviser, yeah.
So that is already enough for a lot of happiness. But,
really?
Yeah.
Why am I not happy all the time?
I think you might be more than most people.
Okay. Maybe.
But it depends a bit though, because it depends whether you perceive what you're doing as meaningful.
So that's the other part,
Yeah.
meaningful. So what does that mean?
That typically means that you feel like you contribute to something larger than yourself, like a raid in World of Warcraft, when you're collaborating with people all over the world and you have this shared experience. That's larger than your own tiny existence. Another thing that seems to boost happiness in general, and is basically our sort of natural capacity for pattern recognition. Like that is the kind of stuff your brain just loves doing, sort of categorizing that stuff and finding patterns in chaos.
And we're ingrained with that. It's in our DNA.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tetris is a great example. At first glance, the falling blocks are seen as chaotic, but our brains thrive on finding patterns in chaos and figuring out the solution. It's the puzzle our brain was designed to solve. So in this case, the old cliche is true. Time really does fly when you're having fun. So what were the early games you became obsessed with?
Well, of course, Tetris. I did a lot of Tetris.
But there's no happiness in Tetris, according to the pillars that we've defined.
There is this immediate sense of happiness, certainly, and certainly flow.
Explain the concept of flow.
So the key to happiness for a lot of people seems to be these activities that are really difficult, but you have the skill to just master it. So a typical example includes playing an instrument or doing a sport or anything like that. And it seems like the brain just really loves just focusing on one thing, instead of this constant multitasking we do all the time.
Because humans like to find patterns because it gives us what, control?
Yeah, and it's sort of basic survival in a very elementary way as well, of course. And that brings us on to this topic of addiction, because you have the same thing running through that as well, this sort of search for patterns. There is, of course, a big difference between physiological addiction and behavioral addiction, between sort of substance abuse and behavioral abuse.
For decades, there has been a seemingly non-stop debate about the addictiveness of video games. While hundreds of studies have been conducted, the results are inconsistent. For example, 2 German studies conducted 1 year apart came to significantly different conclusions. One claimed that 3% of all teenage gamers were addicts, while the other arrived at 6%. 29 independent studies were conducted between 2009 and 2013 to analyze the links between classic substance addiction and behavioral addiction. And what did they conclude? According to the American Association of Addiction Psychiatry, the link between increased dopamine release in excessive video game play and classic substance abuse can be made. However, since the research is in its early stages, it's too early to know if video game addiction is actually equivalent to substance addiction.
You see this very often in casual games and free-to-play games and sort of puzzle games, sort of cascading stuff and so on.
And they're built on this variable reward engine, basically?
Yeah, if you do a particular type of behavior and you are consistently rewarded, then you tend to want to do that more. But you have this phenomenon called variable ratio reinforcement schemes, which just basically means that there is no identifiable pattern between what you're doing and when you're going to get your reward. And when that happens, we just become obsessed with it and we sort of try to impose patterns onto this that aren't there. Like, this is why you hear people talking about being on a lucky streak or being jinxed. So gambling and slot machines is, of course, a classical example. But then you have this gaming industry, it does exactly the same thing. There's lots of money involved.
And they just, every once in a while, they'll win points or they'll get coins.
Yes, every once in a while you do something and that just creates this avalanche of rewards. And like, whoa, I must have done something right. And then you just keep on going because you need to figure out, what is this pattern? What did I do right now?
But they never deliver on a pattern.
Precisely.
That's the whole construct of it.
Precisely.
So the frustration of the ability to find patterns is what creates addiction? Sort of?
I generally think we need to be very careful about throwing the addiction label around. I think it's sort of massively overstated in the media.
Yeah.
But those kinds of game mechanics are the ones that I think are cause for concern.
With the term video game addiction being defined so differently among various studies and groups, there is no scientific or medical consensus on the topic. One thing we do know is that, while most people associate addiction with substances, such as drugs or alcohol, many doctors are beginning to recognize addictive behaviors as well. In recent years, the American Psychiatric Association updated their Mental Health Bible, or DSM-5, to include internet gaming disorder as a psychological condition that warrants future research. They list 9 criteria for IGD, including preoccupation, withdrawal symptoms, increasing amounts of time, unsuccessful attempts to control, loss of interest in hobbies and entertainment, denial in the face of overwhelming proof, deception of family and friends, escapism, lost jobs, relationships, or opportunities. Score 5 or more, and according to the APA, you are a video game addict.
So pretending as if gaming addiction is a disease and we need to blame games for that, I think it's entirely the wrong approach. We need to just rather ask, why are people going to games instead of reality?
We started Just Cause as a film entertainment company, and I had done some motion capture. The approach is pretty much the same. So when we started our company, we kind of were just hungry. We were like, we need projects. And I realized from that experience doing motion capture for video games that they only used Japanese talent, and they would end up dubbing them into English later. And I was like, well, how about let's hit up the game companies and tell them that they can go through Just Cause to get talent from LA. As a video game, there's obviously a lot more that goes into it because you're talking about a 17-hour or a 30-hour experience as opposed to a 2-hour experience. Even though you're not mashing buttons and you're there, you're still trying to suck them into this world. There's so many different ways to do that. The best way is writing, and then after that, you try your typical techniques of, cool effects and visuals. Technology is exponential, and what we're able to have and the stuff coming down the pipe, it's amazing. It gets better and better. Now, with the access of this technology, the accessibility getting to anybody in their homes, the sky's the limit. They can create anything.
As games become more and more realistic and those technologies become freely available to people, it becomes easier and easier to do. Moving forward as technology and the rendering systems of engines, real becomes very easy to do. Shaders and textures in games become more physically based. And that look is very easy to do, but then for us, for example, with Street Fighter, we take these characters who are deformed and exaggerated, to really pop off the screen. If you add super realistic art on top of that, there's a disconnect.
Technically, the technology has just gone wild. It's becoming more and more immersed. You're gonna start feeling the hits when you get hit through some sort of vibration or through some sort of sound wave. And it's gonna be like little probes or a little vest on your body as you're playing the game, and you'll be able to really experience the moment when the crash occurs. Whether they get more and more realistic, who knows? Because the artistic choice of not being so realistic ends up being very cool because, after all, it really is just a game.
All right, so I'm supposed to do a magic trick and fool you? Or
Yes.
How does that, okay,
yes.
okay.
I felt for a moment like I was just pre-sneeze. I don't think I really am.
I've been doing voices in games for my friends. Never charged for it, never got paid for it.
David, you could use a manager. I could come on board.
Yeah, because I was
Because
kind of
of
boring
this.
just there. You pulled your phone out.
No,
No, I'm just kidding.
I take my 3x5 cars to sick children in the hospital.
For the children.
Because they love 3x5 cars.
Do they?
We were just discussing a little bit about what a producer does. We ended up with the producer is the guy that goes out and gets the coffee.
Gets the coffee.
When we were making some characters for the game, we were doing the typical robot thing, and I wanted them to feel completely flawed and broken. And I thought, Dave, would you go down in the booth and just yell out some lines?
All we got left is Claptrap, and we're not.
Actually, remote can't Claptrap.
I think we should have a talk show.
I
This
think
is
we should.
going very well.
Call 3x5 cards.